Okay, so we are live on session 2, and I believe that we're live on Facebook and YouTube. I'm just gonna ask if anybody's watching, please let me know if you can see it. If you can see it on Facebook, if you can see it on YouTube. Can you see this on Facebook, YouTube? All right. And I'm just gonna welcome everybody back from the previous session. In the previous session, we had a very powerful interview with Gurudev Sri Sri Ravi Shankar, as well as a very, very powerful conversation with two bereaved parents from Israel and Palestine. They're part of the organization called Parents Circle, and we had a conversation about peace, forgiveness, reconciliation, and also about what should be done, what can we do as people around the world. Should we be protesting, taking a side? Should we be just pro-peace and joining hands? It's a very powerful conversation, so if you haven't seen it, I would recommend watching it later. But for now, in about 10 minutes, we're going to be streaming the Chandra Lacombe Beautiful Song for Peace and an interview with Chandra as well, and then Nonviolent Peaceforce in Sudan and Myanmar. So for now, I'm going to play a We'll Be Right Back song, and we'll be right back in about 5 or 7 minutes. Okay. This is the Be Right Back song. Hello, everyone. I can see people starting to trickle back in to view the second session of Meditation Magazine's Peace Summit. Thank you for joining us in the first session with Gurudev Sri Sri Ravi Shankar and the Parents Circle, Israeli and Palestinian family members who have lost loved ones in the war. The upcoming session, which is starting in about 1 or 2 minutes, is going to include Chandra Lacombe, a beautiful musical artist from Brazil, and his song for peace. And I'm about to play that in a moment, and then an interview with him as well. And after the interview with Chandra Lacombe, we will be hosting Nonviolent Peaceforce. They are on the ground in Sudan, in Myanmar, many countries around the world, and they're going to be talking to us about how to make peace, to help keep people safe, to hopefully resolve conflicts using nonviolent means. So for now, I'm going to play you one of the most beautiful songs that I've ever heard in my life. That makes me cry when I listen to it, and that has really helped me in my emotional journey of creating this Peace Summit and the Peace issue of Meditation Magazine. So I'm going to play Song for Peace right now. Song for Peace. Here it is.
There must be a way for peace. All creatures here, out of love, shall lead a life of joy and equanimity, to heal the heart's animosity. Time has taught to reform misdeeds and to remember to find within our gift. So share your love and trust the real peace can conquer war. Come sing with me. Oh Masatoma Sagamaya Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya Mrityurma Amritangamaya Shanti Shanti Shanti. There must be a way for peace. All creatures here, out of love, shall lead a life of joy and equanimity, to heal the heart's animosity. Time has taught to reform misdeeds and to remember to find within our gift. So share your love and trust the real peace can conquer war. Come sing with me. Oh Masatoma Sagamaya Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya gamaya. Shanti, shanti, shanti. Oh, oh, Om Satoma Sagamaya. Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya. Mrityarma Amritam Gamaya. Shanti, shanti, shanti. Shanti, shanti, shanti. Shanti, shanti, shanti. Shanti, shanti, shanti.
That was a beautiful song called Song for Peace by Chandra Lacombe, a wonderful Brazilian artist. And we're going to be doing an interview, a very, very brief interview with Chandra that lasts about 10 minutes. And then we're going to talk to Nonviolent Peaceforce. Tiffany Eastholm is in the studio. I see you there, Tiffany. Hello. And I'll bring you on screen in a couple of minutes after the Chandra recording, which was recorded a couple of days ago. And I know Nick Pyatt is coming too, I believe, and she's the head of country in Sudan, head of mission in Sudan. Tiffany is the executive director, but I'm going to introduce them in a moment. First, I'm going to share the interview with Chandra Lacombe, which is going to run right now. Here with Chandra Lacombe. He is a beautiful musical artist from Brazil. Right now, he's got an ashram in Brazil, and he has made one of the most beautiful songs that I've ever heard in my life. It's called Song for Peace. I'll just tell you before I ask Chandra some questions about the song. For me, I've been listening to the song on repeat as I've been doing my work for the peace issue, and some days I'll literally just have tears streaming down my face the entire day with that song on repeat. Whenever I'm looking at these wars in different places in Sudan and in the Middle East and in other places, sometimes I don't feel that full emotion of it when I'm just doing it without any music. I'm just in this sort of logical way of looking at these things. And when I'm listening to the music, I just feel it fully. And it's such a beautiful way to experience the realities of life. There's these terrible realities, but there's also this beautiful yearning that we have for peace. So Chandra, thank you for making that song. And I want to just ask you, and thank you for being here today. And I want to ask you, what inspired you to make this song for peace?
Yes, the story is when then I came to know about the conflict between Ukraine and Russia. I was in Sweden, and the news came, and I was actually in a beautiful setting, preparing myself for a seminar of 3 days with a nice group. Yeah, and actually I was triggered in some way with the news. We had just arrived there, took me by a surprise, all in a sudden. But then I took my time to reflect deep, and this led me into my own inner space, inquiring about how can I be in peace sincerely? How can I become a peacemaker? And then came also inspiration. And in the same afternoon of this day, I was already, let's say, channeling and composing the lyric. The melody was already there with me one day before that. And all piece came together. And suddenly I I got this beautiful lyric fitting perfectly in this melody. I had just the mantra is one of the possible mantras which somehow ensure peace. It, that is the Asatoma mantra is quite well known in the Vedic tradition, in the yoga. Somehow it was my way to appeal, to bring some, I call it like my own campaign, and the way that I was trying to inspire people to touch the heart with that message. And I realized, wow, we had a potential song in that sense. So let's try. I was really like, okay, this is something that can actually plant the right seed in the consciousness of people that will hear it. So that was my humble aspiration, somehow, my desire. That song could work like this piece and the seed, you know, planting that deep reflection about where we can actually find the inner peace. What we need in that sense. So the something in the lyric about equanimity was somehow the clue there as well. Yes, something about the search have to start within us. When you then accepting that, or even we can acknowledge that we have to transform our patterns in the way that we indulge our own conflicts, and in the way that maybe, in that sense, there was that I was trying to go deep and to go honest with my own self, bringing that sort of campaign song for peace.
Yeah, and it's one of the most powerful moments, and actually the whole song. I feel so much emotion in the whole song. When you say in the beginning, there must be some way for peace, and you just,
Yeah.
I can hear a yearning in your voice, like a
Yes.
yearning for peace. It's like almost like a cry, and I hear the same kind of yearning, and like that, it's like a deep sadness mixed with a hope. And when you're
Definitely.
singing the mantras, and my question, I want to know what you were feeling in those moments when you were singing that, like when you heard about the war in Ukraine, and what were you feeling in your heart? What was it that drove that super beautiful and strong emotion in the song?
As you said, I got a little anguish, and also come along this sort of uh, helplessness. Wow, at that point of our growth process, evolution process as human being on this planet, we still need to digest those kind of news, and we still need again to, wow, how can we help out in the sense of how can I play my own part, and really like to touch people,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
that came exactly out of this strange tightness in my chest, this anguish, a sorrow in my heart as well. And then art, when you try to transmute feelings, that make this deeper, the effect of the music itself. And somehow I was blessed to go in the right direction in that sense, like
yeah,
really digging within myself and trying to share
yeah,
from this sincere feeling that I was trying to digest at that moment. And
yeah, yeah.
so the lyric translate that. Yeah.
I understand the feeling of that sorrow and that pain, and you see something so terrible, and you want to help, and you want to fix it,
Yeah.
and you want to
Yeah.
make it better. You want to help the people that are suffering, and it's so big, and how can I help? And you are helping with your music, and you are helping with your music. And honestly, for me, that's why we made this the peace issue. Like we have a different topic for each issue that of Meditation Magazine, and this one I knew it had to be the peace issue because I
Fantastic.
knew we needed to help in that way. That's my way. But what about
Yeah.
everybody that's listening that don't have a magazine that they're publishing, or don't have a musical outlet that they're publishing? What can they do to help?
Try to become that peacemaker. And this is for deep within, when actually I use meditation as this doorway somehow to attain a sort of state of harmony, state of stillness and calmness in my mind.
Mm.
I think this is my advice when people feel that some restlessness or some unsettling feelings and encounters or happenings are there, like a test or triggering something. Of course, we need to remember not to take a 2, 3 deep breath, to take a deep breath and to really reconnect with this inner center within us. It is a matter of really being able to center ourselves and to exactly to realize through this inner merging, to realize our true essence, which and recognize and to acknowledge that peace is already there.
Mm.
But we need to take that step, and we need to know how to still the mind somehow, how to really
So it starts within ourselves, within our minds, within our hearts. The peace starts here inside of ourselves, and then to be able to recognize, like you said, that the peace is already here.
It's already there. Yeah.
Yeah. And do you feel that this kind of recognition inside of oneself, inside of ourselves, that this can help to make peace in the wider world, in the big wars?
I believe that is the only way to tell the truth, because everything is inside of us. The world is just a reflection of things that actually are happening within ourselves. More than ever, so we really need to realize those things, and more than ever, we really need to awake our own potential to make this place a better place, to do our part. And of course, it needs to be done, as I said, out of the centeredness and a genuine meeting with our inner witness self, ourselves, the real self.
Yeah. The universal self, the oneness.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The one that can actually understand the connection between outer peace that we wish so much and the inner peace that also is connected with the unity. So when you see that we are one, that we meet in this oneness, so we need to really like anchor our mind, our awareness in that feeling, in that perception that we belong to that oneness.
Yeah, and it's not just a spiritual idea. The entire world is the peace of this world is the peace of the people in this world.
Exactly.
And we are the people in this world.
Yes.
So we can only start with ourselves. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Chandra, for being here today. And thank you for your beautiful music. I'm here. Okay, so thank you for watching. This was the Chandra Lacombe interview, and he wrote the beautiful song for peace. We're going to be going into, we're going to be bringing in Tiffany and Nick from Nonviolent Peaceforce in a moment. And I'm going to, just to remind our viewers of that song, I'll play the first few seconds of Song for Peace. Such a beautiful song. And if you want to find it, you can go on YouTube.
There must be a way for peace. All creatures here, out of love, shall lead a life.
So if you want to find the song, go on YouTube and search for a song for peace and Chandra Lacombe. I'll put it in the comments. Song for peace, Chandra Lacombe. And now I'm going to bring into the studio Tiffany, Nick, and Dr. Kim, who has rejoined us here for the second session. Oh, I think I have to switch to this layout or something. This layout. Nope. I'll figure out one of these layouts. There we go. I'm going to make sure that I'm just going to mute everyone's mic so we don't have any echo. Okay, and then we'll be able to get started now. So just to introduce Nonviolent Peaceforce. Nonviolent Peaceforce is an organization that is on the ground in many countries that is helping to keep people safe through nonviolent means and to try to help in whatever way they can in nonviolent ways. So Tiffany Eastham, who's here, is the executive director of Nonviolent Peaceforce, and Nick Pyatt is the head of mission for Sudan, I believe, if that's the correct title. I think so, right? Yeah, put up a thing if I got that right. Okay, sounds good. And I think that they have some PowerPoint slides on how we can help resolve, not necessarily resolve conflicts, but at least de-escalate. And we can learn from them. I think we can learn a lot from them about how we can use nonviolence to make things better in conflict situations. So I'd like to welcome Nick and Tiffany. Feel free to unmute your mics whenever you're ready, or at least when you're talking, and then mute it back when you're not talking. Thank you for being here. And Dr. Kim, would you like to get us started with some questions?
Yes, I would love to. Well, first of all, it's so wonderful to meet you, Tiffany and Nick. I'm really looking forward to this part 2 of the Incredible Peace Summit. I'd like to begin by asking both of you, actually, what is your philosophy regarding using nonviolence instead of using force?
Hang on, I'll unmute you. Oh, maybe when I mute you, you can't unmute yourself. I'm not sure.
Technology.
Yeah.
How about now? Better?
Beautiful.
Oh, well, you can hear me, so at least they're going.
That's a good start, yes.
Great. Thank you for that. And sorry, can you repeat the question? I was so concerned about my mic that it's now.
Please do not worry about it, that we are in this together. We work as a team. So my question is, what is your philosophy regarding using nonviolence instead of using force?
Yeah, so Nonviolent Peace Force, we use it's a methodology that we call unarmed civilian protection, which is in essence activated nonviolence. So, really building on the interview we just saw with Chandra and how he was really speaking about pieces within, and that work starts from within. That's our starting place, and then we have just taken it to another stage of that, where we work together in an organized fashion to utilize tools, strategies, actions that are rooted and based in activated nonviolence to be able to interrupt cycles of violence, to be able to affect change in violence situations, to try and have an immediate impact on threats of violence and then where the philosophy piece comes in is trying to push out and create some safer space around people who are really dealing with really difficult situations. So it really starts and is grounded in nonviolence, solidarity. People are in the worst moments of their lives. They're facing the most difficult periods that they can be in, to know that they're not alone, and to know that while it seems overwhelming and impossible, it is possible in many cases to change the outcome of the threats of violence or of what is happening in a violent situation without using additional weapons or the threat of force to add to the mix, to be able to de-escalate the situation. First and foremost, for people to live, to breathe, to be able to live the most normal life they possibly can, despite whatever is happening around them, for political decisions and so on and so forth. And then hopefully that those folks can then be involved in building the peaceful community that they want, that works for them.
Nick, do you have a response that you would like to share as well? And what is your philosophy regarding using nonviolence instead of using force? I imagine you both have alignment in this answer, but not sure if there's anything else you'd like to add.
No, that's very much it. Tiffany covers this for the global organization.
Okay, wonderful. Then I'll start with asking you first, Nick, and then I'd love to know from you, Tiffany, although you touched on it. What is your role in the Nonviolent Peace Force? What is it that you specifically do for all of us to understand that much more?
Yeah, so I am the head of the mission for the Sudan program. We, as you mentioned, as Kevin mentioned earlier, we work in many countries across the world. So Iraq, Ukraine, South Sudan, Myanmar, the Philippines. But I actually manage the program that we have in Sudan. Unfortunately, because of the security situation there at the moment, I'm not with my team. They are in Darfur, whereas you've probably heard the security situation is particularly dire at the moment. So I unfortunately am managing remotely at the moment.
Understood. I appreciate that, Nick. On that, I'm sorry, it sounded like someone was speaking. Since you have brought this up, Tiffany, I would like to go to you next with that question to answer a little bit more specifically. But Nick, since we are speaking about Sudan, may I ask you, how are you working to keep civilians safe? And do you see a path forward to resolving the conflict that is happening?
Oh, and I just like to add to that question also. Can you just give a little background on what is happening for our viewers?
Yes.
It can be about the general conflict, but also about what's happening on the ground right now.
Yes.
Yeah, certainly. Maybe let me start with the overview of Sudan at the moment, just to provide a little bit of context and a bit of grounding for how we work. So Sudan at the moment, we just 2 weeks ago, we passed the 1-year anniversary of the war that has taken over the entire country. And it's very safe to say that with each passing week, the situation has just got worse and worse. Sudan is now the biggest displacement crisis in the world, with more than 8 million people who've been forced to leave their homes to find places of better safety. In addition to this, there is now approximately 12 million people who are severely food insecure. Sudan is on the doorstep of a famine. And as of 5 weeks ago, more people were actually leaving the country because of food scarcity than they were because of the violence. And that's a very worrying trend, because even if the war was to end tomorrow, all of the systems behind food production and supply chains have been destroyed. So that food situation will not rectify itself anytime soon. People have felt too unsafe to be able to plant or to harvest crops. And so this is now a situation that will recur for years and years, even if a ceasefire was to magically happen tomorrow. I realize these are very big, these are very overwhelming numbers. Even for a humanitarian, when we get into the millions, it becomes incredibly hard to comprehend. So I think just to touch very briefly on what this might look like for your average family. This is now a situation where they've had to run from their homes. They've lost their properties. They've lost their homes. Some will have obviously lost family and friends in the process. They've had to leave to places that they have no support networks. They don't know anybody. They've just had to run. There is very little humanitarian assistance. And in many areas of the country, there is no humanitarian assistance because of challenges in getting supplies and personnel to those areas, again, because of security issues. So for your average family on a daily basis, they are having to make decisions such as, do we feed ourselves or do we feed our children? You have parents who are terrified that their teenagers are going to be mobilized into armed groups and they may not see them again. You have parents who are trying to access medical help for their children and they're unable to. So they're watching their children get increasingly sick and lose a lot of weight as the food situation continues. You also have many, many women who are on a daily basis absolutely terrified for their own safety because rape and sexual violence has been used as a weapon of war since the very beginning. So the numbers can be incredibly overwhelming, but I think it's very important as we move through to, and one thing that is very important to us as a team is to really focus on what that means for individuals, because that's how you make it possible to try and find ways to support and to try and find ways in which to protect civilians. It's very much going from the individual level, from the community level, and going upwards, and looking at how to support that way. That's sort of how we start. So then looking at the original questions on how do we try to support civilians in this context? Honestly, it's very difficult, but it's not impossible. This is a piece of work that offers a glimmer of hope every day, because even if we're helping a few individuals to keep themselves safer, it provides hope and it provides motivation for everybody. So we do this in a number of ways. Broadly, it splits into kind of 3 categories for my team. One is directly working with the communities, and this can look very different. So one thing that we're very proud of is that we've been able to set up what we call women's protection teams. This is not rocket science and it's not expensive, but it is incredibly effective. So what we did was coordinate groups of women within an IDP camp to come together, and we taught them about risk and community safety and strategies to improve their safety. So these women's groups, they outlined that for them, one of the riskiest situations was to go and collect firewood or to go and collect water, because they're very vulnerable, and this was where they were frequently attacked and raped. They came together with the support of our team, and they came up with this strategy whereby whenever there are tasks like this to be done, they will organize themselves to go together to make sure that individual women are not vulnerable to being attacked. This has been working incredibly well, and as of this year, the medical agencies working in that camp have said that the number of rapes has dropped dramatically. And that is even in the context of conflict, even in the context where we have more and more displaced persons coming into that camp every day. And so this is a wonderful example that I like to talk about, because it's something that the community identified and came up with solutions for themselves and enacted themselves. We're there to support, but we're not there to necessarily do. In other situations, we are there to do. We are there to provide the direct protection. And where there are areas that are particularly risky, that the community have said is a real area of concern for safety of them, our team do go there and provide a visible presence and act as a deterrent for individuals who would like to engage in violence. We also provide a lot of support for people trying to access humanitarian services. So, for example, a woman who is seeking specialist care after having been raped, with our community groups or with our team, we will work to ensure she receives the support that she needs. This is very hard at the moment because there are so few actors and so little healthcare available, but it can be anything. It could be ensuring that the health actor has the contact and can reach them, or it could be us physically taking them to a clinic or providing psychosocial care. So there's a number of ways in which we work specifically with the community to look at their own safety and security. Another one that we have done is shuttle dialogue, shuttle diplomacy, where we encourage groups to develop a conversation and develop trust and understand each other in order to reduce the violent manifestation of conflict. This takes a lot of investment, not a lot of investment, it takes time, and it takes working at a pace. I think Tiffany says it, working at the pace of building trust, which can be, obviously, it's not an immediate quick fix. When communities have distrusted and disliked each other for many, many decades, it can be very hard to reverse. But it is something that we find is particularly effective, because you then have community leaders or community members who have been trained and have relationships with the other community to de-escalate when a conflict is arising. So that's sort of the broad community aspect of what we do. Another aspect is where we work with duty bearers. So this may be humanitarian actors, it might be local authorities, or it might be armed groups. So particularly with the local authorities and with humanitarian actors, we do a lot of work to ensure that everybody within a community can safely access humanitarian assistance. So this can be supporting at a distribution to make sure the most vulnerable people can come, to support them to actually come to the distribution site, be it physically or safely. Or it could be working with the humanitarian actors to ensure that they have a full overview of the population and that their assistance is going to be reaching everybody. Another particular activity that we do is training of armed actors, particularly in international humanitarian law, in civilian protection, and women in conflict. This is to increase their awareness and understanding of what is a civilian, how should a civilian be treated in the context of war, and with the intention that this will help to improve the safety of the civilians that they engage with. So, for example, it can improve the safety of people passing through a checkpoint as they're trying to get water or go to the market. And then the third broad category of the activities we engage in is advocacy. And particularly with Sudan at the moment, this has been a real point at which we've put in a lot of effort, because there needs to be advocacy at all levels. Obviously, the push for a ceasefire is essential. That has to happen. And that requires advocacy at the highest of political levels. There's also advocacy we do on particular incidents. So with my team at the moment, they are in North Darfur. And at the moment, North Darfur is gearing up for a huge battle between the conflict parties. And so there has been very targeted advocacy at the political level with various governments to try and de-escalate this before it happens. The other levels of advocacy we do as well is very much at the community level. So we recognize that while a big ceasefire for the country is needed, that will take time. And actually the context in Sudan demands more than a one-size-fits-all. You know, it's a very different country from state to state, the dynamics, the people, they're all very different. And so as NP, what we look for is to find a patchwork of local solutions, a patchwork of local civilian protection solutions or peace solutions that can then be scaled out. And if they scale far enough, with any luck, that will influence the wider national context as well. So we will work with community leaders to try and advocate for de-escalation. We will work with our women's protection teams or community groups to support them to advocate for their own needs. And this is something that's really exciting that we've seen, because we're able to create a space for women's voices, for women to organize themselves and go to duty bearers or to security actors to demand things for themselves or to develop relationships and negotiate on protection issues for themselves. So there's a number of levels at which we engage in advocacy to improve the safety of civilians in very differing ways. I realized that was quite a very long answer, and I'm sorry that that's gone on for a while. I get very excited about our work in Sudan, so I could talk all day, but I will finish that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, hang on. Thank you. Sorry, Dr. Kim, I wanted to poke in another question here, if I could. So Tiffany, we'll get to you in a few minutes. We're talking about Sudan, and I'm very interested because it's something that I think we don't hear about enough in the United States. We hear about Israel and Gaza. We used to hear about Ukraine. Now we just very rarely get any news about this. So I think a lot of people are wondering what started this. Why is this happening in Sudan? And what can the international community do? Can we put pressure on something, or can we what can we advocate for something? What can we in the international community do to try to help resolve it? Okay.
So that is a very, very complex, very historical question. So basically, this has come about between two groups who were previously co-sharing power in Sudan, and it was an agreement that had been facilitated with a lot of outside support. Unfortunately, it broke down. And I won't go too far into the politics because that's a little bit outside of our realm. But basically what this has led to is what was predominantly, initially at least, a conflict between the Rapid Support Forces, which is a group that emanates from way back in the conflict in Darfur, and between the national military. So this is very much started off as a big political conflict. But unfortunately, because both groups garner their power from different demographic bases. And unfortunately, largely, the Rapid Support Forces are predominantly Arab, and they're made up of Arab militia and allied tribes. And then SAF, the Sudanese Armed Forces, are backed largely by and from an African population. So the really, really sad thing about this conflict is that there is an entirely ethnic undertone to it as well. So it makes it very, very difficult when it comes down to the community level. As you said, it has not gained anywhere near the level of attention that it deserves. I mean, as I said earlier, the biggest displacement crisis in the world, another famine that's coming up. The implications that the Sudan war has for the region are incredibly destabilizing. You have millions of people moving into Chad, moving into South Sudan, into Egypt, all countries that are already facing their own humanitarian crises. So this has big, wide-ranging consequences, not just for Sudan as a country, but for the region and actually globally as well. So it's something that really should have a lot more attention on it than it has had. And it's something that we have worked really hard, and there's a few journalists and a few news channels that have been really good at highlighting this, but it's not anywhere near on the scale it should be compared to what's actually going on. So I think the main thing in your question to how can the international community help it's really about talking about this. It's about illuminating this. It's about giving it the attention it deserves for the severity of the crisis that it is. And it's not just talking about the doom and gloom. It's not just talking about the fact that women are being raped and and kids are joining armed forces. There's a huge amount to learn from Sudan as well. You have a really active local response. You have really active community groups that are finding creative ways to keep themselves safe. You have amazing stories of strength and resilience coming out from civilians. So there's a huge amount of good hope or glimmer of hope stories coming out from Sudan as well that really need to be acknowledged acknowledged globally and by the world, and highlighted a lot more, because you see, I mean, in all of my career in TIFF, I think it would be probably in yours, the response that has come from local civil society and from the national civilians themselves has far outweighed the international response. The motivation, the organization, the energy to be able to respond and to keep civilians safe has been utterly inspiring. And so while there does need to be the huge attention at the political level in international media, it shouldn't just be about the fact that people are being killed. That's important. But there is also massive, massive messages of hope, and particularly around civilian safety, coming out of this as well.
Yeah, thank you so much, Nick. And I wanted to, here, I'm just going to mute your mic for a second because there's a little bit of an echo. There's a comment from Megan Wiskin that I'd like to just put in here. There's, sometimes we like to take comments and questions from the audience. Megan asked, can we not set up online social care so that they have support from people like in the UK that they can call in a call center and talk to a registered nurse, or even something like a Samaritan advice for them while they wait for physical support?
That would be utterly amazing. Unfortunately, the challenge that compounds this at the moment, and something that is our latest advocacy pitch, is that communication networks across Sudan are not reliable or accessible by many. The mobile phone infrastructures have been a big target for all armed groups. And so it means that majority of civilians don't have access to internet, even to information, even to be able to call their families and check that they're okay. This is a huge, huge issue for civilian safety. They're not even able to check where is safe to run if they have to go. So this is a huge problem right now. In addition, for organizations such as ourselves, we've been lucky enough to utilize satellite communications up until very recently, but it looks as if these are also going to be prohibited as well. So we're looking at a potential where even I won't be able to speak to my team, which obviously does not help things, does not help get the message out to the world. But if you think about, your average person who's trying to check on the safety of their sister and their kids, they can't do that. They can't figure out where it's safe to go. They can't figure out where food supplies are coming in from, or when to go to the market to get it. So the issue of communication and that ability to communicate with the outside world as well as internally is a huge one. And it's a massive one that would help improve the safety of civilians at the moment. Can we call on Elon? Yes, please. If you know Elon Musk, please do it. Because Starlink is the thing that is under threat at the moment. So if you can call Elon Musk, please do.
Yeah, it's a big problem, and I hope that this can be resolved. Yes, and if anybody knows Elon Musk, please call him to help with the situation. So I know, Nick, that you had been trying to get your colleagues in Darfur and in, I think, in Myanmar also, to send some recordings about what was going on, because it's so hard to get communication through the networks. Were you able to get those?
So they were still uploading as, unfortunately, I was coming into this. So hopefully by the end of this, I will have something for you. But my team in Sudan, they didn't feel comfortable because of the intelligence and security environment. They're not on screen, but there is a voice recording, and hopefully I can have that for us a bit later.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Nick. And I know that you have sent some slides. Actually, maybe this would be something that Tiffany could show. I'm not sure if it makes sense for Tiffany to show these slides. It's about, I'd like to let you talk about what it's about. Do you want to go ahead with that, Tiffany? And then we'll get back to the questions from Dr. Kim.
The buttons here. Oh, I'm muted. Good.
You're on.
Great. Sure. And I can present here, right? I'm new to StreamYard, so forgive
Do you see
my...
the present button at the bottom? Then you can click that, and then there's a slides thing that I think you can upload a PowerPoint.
Okay. I can share a screen, I guess.
No, I would recommend uploading the PowerPoint slides just as the slides, if you can see that option, because it will be smoother that way.
Uh-huh. Oh, add
So
file.
if you want to talk, I can work on that.
Okay, thanks. Great. We had, for everybody, for people who are listening and following along, we had prepared a little bit of a PowerPoint presentation, not to really to resist the death by PowerPoint option. However, what we're talking about conceptually in terms of the application of unarmed civilian protection can be a little bit hard to grasp if you're new to the subject. So speaking about nonviolence as a philosophy, as an internal practice is one thing. And how does that translate into organized activity in active conflict zones? So the slide deck that we have prepared just sort of helps map that a little bit, tells you a little bit more about our organization, Nonviolent Peaceforce, and gives you an opportunity to have a couple of visuals to attach to that. So that's what we'll share.
Yes, it's uploading right now on my end. So if in case Nick was having trouble with it, it's processing. I think it might take a second. Okay.
Well, that's happening. Maybe can I just add on to the conversation about Sudan?
Absolutely.
Putting it in sort of this larger framework around nonviolence. So, you know, Nick was talking about the realities of the day. And I think one thing to help us all remember is that when a war starts, once that starts, and that kind of, you know, our approach to everything is conflict is inevitable, interpersonal, intrastate, it's inevitable. Violence does not have to be. But once a war starts, the level of destruction and the damage to everything from physical infrastructure to social cohesion and all points in between is a multi-generational impact. And Sudan's a great example of this. I mean, they were 15 years or so into a peace agreement when this particular war started. So it is a cycle that has been sitting there. I just want to say, if anybody's feeling sensitive to the designations of Arab and African, that's the way people in Darfur self-identify, people in Sudan self-identify. So we're not applying those labels. Those are labels that they apply to themselves and how they identify as groups to each other. So just to be really clear, in case there's any sensitivities around that. But this whole process of this peace agreement breaking down is we had this group, which was, you may remember from the early 2000s, hearing about the Janjaweed in the military. So the Janjaweed was effectively brought, in attempt to bring them into a peace agreement, was rebranded as the Rapid Support Forces. And then this is now the group that is now in conflict with the Sudan Armed Forces. And what it can really speak to is, despite quite significant efforts getting to the root causes of power sharing and inclusive representation in a very diverse country, has failed. And that's usually where it breaks down. That's usually where it breaks down, is those root causes don't get addressed and the foundational problems re-emerge in different versions.
Thank you for providing that context, Tiffany. We have, I see that the slides have loaded. Nick, do you want to go through the slides, or do you want to share them on the stage? I can click on add to stage. Here, I'll click add to stage. There you go. And Nick or Tiffany, you can go through them. I'm not sure. Do you have the access to be able to click the slides, like to next slide and stuff like that?
Great question.
Yeah, you got it. So who wants to go through it, Nick or Tiffany? And then we'll get to more questions from Dr. Kim, because we have a bunch.
Great. So we'll try not to belabor it. So again, what is unarmed civilian protection, or UCP, is the language you'll hear us say. So it's really about working with unarmed civilians with use of weapons, the threat of force, to work together in a coordinated fashion to be able to protect. So that's the immediate concern: reduce incidents of violence, interrupt cycles of violence, provide direct protection, or risk reduction for people who are facing physical harm. Threatening somebody's physical safety is the quickest way to interrupt work on justice and accountability, and to be able to force your agenda. So this is primary concern number one, to support local efforts at self-protection. We cannot, there's never going to be enough external aid and never enough humanitarian aid, enough external actors to be able to come in and to to manage and to provide all the help that's needed. 8 million people are displaced in Sudan alone. So really support local civilian populations to be able to address what we're trying to do is remove barriers that enable this ongoing asymmetrical power relationships that normalize violence, that normalize deprivation, and to build infrastructure for peace. We're collectively across the globe, we're very good at building infrastructure for war and for profit and for greed. We are not very good at intentionally building actual infrastructure for peace. So that's the three elements that we consider. Go ahead, Nick. This is just a bit about NP. This is kind of where we are across the map. NP has been operational for 22 years. We started off with one country program in Sri Lanka at that time, and now we are operating in a number of locations around the world. And that does include programming in the United States. And I think that's an important addition. There's a conception that this type of work, particularly when it's framed as humanitarian work, is really about responding to needs in what is largely the global south. And what we always tell ourselves in NP is we could do this work literally in any country in the world. What you see, what the type of violence might look a little bit different in the way it's manifested, but there's work to be done everywhere. So we now do direct implementation in the US as well, which arguably in many ways is one of our most difficult contexts to work in. Go ahead. It's just a bit about who we are and the work that we do. We have people who work from us from all over the world at any given moment. We've got representations between 40 to 50 countries in our collective global team. The teams are depending on what the context is, what the access is. They're generally mixed. People who are hired locally from the communities that we're serving, and people who come from other places, either within the region or further out, who bring in experience and expertise and an identity that is not of the context and the conflict. What can be helpful. We work in a nonpartisan perspective. This is really important. Is we don't take sides in the conflict. We are on the sides of civilians. We are pro nonviolence. We are anti-violence. That's our partisanship. But in terms of it's not just about the headline issues around the conflict. It also relates to that we are required to be effective at our jobs, to build functional working relationships with all stakeholders in the landscape. So this means authorities, local government, police, the military, the militias, non-state armed actors, community members themselves, so on and so forth. And if we're going to be able to be effective at influencing, we need to be able to build relationships in that space. As I said, our teams are quite diverse. We really work in a very strategic and nimble approach. We have, all the things that an organization needs, project plans and budgets and all of these elements that you need to be able to work well and be good, responsible stewards. However, we really try and protect an adaptability, a flexibility within particularly for the implementation teams, so that they can be responding as contexts are changed. They're not locked into something that was maybe designed a year ago when something very different is happening directly in front of them. We try to delegate the decision making for direct implementation on programming as close to the needs as possible. Our teams are embedded and immersed in the communities that we serve, which allows us to be to build trust. It allows us to be responsive. We are there in the evenings, we're there at night, and are able to be able to work together. As I said, it was activated nonviolence. And when we talk about being cost effective, we're really thinking about the sort of this disparity between sending in an armed force and sending in civilians. It's good value for money. It's not the same approach. There's a whole spectrum of responses that need to happen, but there, in terms of impact for folks who are affected by violence, it's a pretty cost-effective way to really change the calculus. And we really think about it as contributing to a new story of humanity. We try to really contribute to the shift between a mechanistic divided society towards a collaborative approach to life, where we all realize we are all pieces of the same puzzle. And then you cannot just simply lift one out. The puzzle doesn't work anymore. So if we think, nonviolence, if that's the center, the glue of everything that happens, and then we see UCP as a part of that puzzle. There's no singular answer. We live in a world of complex problems, but we really work to try and be contributory to that paradigm shift. And this is some elements of what UCP means in sort of more lay language, right? So it's safety is an experience, protection is a process, it's bottom up and relational. It's really based on building relationships. You see from the photo, this is a lot of what our activities look like. It's about building, moving at the pace of trust, opening up space for dialogue, creating space for inclusivity, removing barriers to inclusivity, being as transparent as possible, and creating an environment that is more predisposed to reducing violence. We call this the UCP wheel. So it's great. Okay, so this is our theory. These are the ideas. People always say, okay, but what do you actually do on a day-to-day basis? What does it actually look like? So this is a training tool we use with our staff and with communities that we engage with when we do onward training. So we call it the UCP wheel. And you can see the different types of activities that we will do. It's a mix and match menu. And it includes everything from this direct protection piece. So that can be doing protective accompaniment, for example. So we have somebody who's a civil society activist or a human rights defender, a group of people who are being targeted and being threatened because of their ethnic identity, women, as Nick was sharing, who are being targeted because, conflict-related sexual violence. There's those elements. We will work with individuals or small organizations and groups or communities to do protective accompaniment, strategic presence, interpositioning, shuttle diplomacy to try and affect a different outcome, utilizing our presence as a trusted nonpartisan actor that can liaise between those making the threats and those who are on the receiving end of those threats, and to affect and influence a change in behaviors. People will make threats when there are no witnesses. They will act on those threats when there are no witnesses. It really changes the calculus when there's a real organized presence of a witness representing the care and concern of the international community. And then other elements around there relate to the longer term, the deeper dive work that we're doing, trying to support sustainable change, sustainable peace, really digging into what are the root causes. Why is this a recurring conflict cycle that has happened for the past 50, 60, 70 years? Why is it intergenerational? What can we help contribute that will shift the approach that'll be a little bit different? So that's what we work with from there. And then what does it actually look like in practice? So sometimes it helps just to hear a little story. This is a group of women in South Sudan. We have Nick referenced this. One of the things that we find that's really useful is helping women organize themselves around peace and security. So for us, we call it women's protection teams, WPTs. And this really was born of really recognizing that there is a lot of language, particularly in armed conflict settings, where women are referred to and there's concern raised about women being victims of violence. And it's really framed in quite paternalistic language. Women are victims and they need protection. And then when you look at the table and say, okay, well, who are the peace and security actors? It's almost exclusively armed actors, which means it's almost exclusively men. So that's our starting place and saying, okay, well, how do we, again, we're thinking about removing barriers. Exclusivity is dangerous. Inclusivity is where we're all safer. So how do we remove those barriers and support and encourage inclusivity? So we started doing some work with women, asking them, what is it that they would want? Starting from their perspective, what do you want to do? And in hopes of helping to elevate and sort of a little theory of change is if one or two women are seen as being leaders in peace and security being an important word in that phrase, by the rest of the community, that those women themselves will be safer, and that safety can expand out to other women, and that has borne fruit. So women in South Sudan and other countries that we work in have really come together and said, listen, we do this all the time. We know what our risks are. This is how we're already trying to protect ourselves and each other. And yes, we would like to be more organized about it. And here's where we think we could use some training, some support, some accompaniment when we're doing things that make us a little bit nervous. So, we've got, again, in different countries. I had the opportunity, I worked in South Sudan previously before I was executive director. I had held the same role that Nick did in South Sudan. And I had the opportunity to spend some time over the years with a number of our WPTs. And at one point I was out with a group who was responding to a concern. There had been an ongoing conflict between two groups of cattle keepers. So young men, they keep cattle, they are armed, and cattle is the representation of wealth. It's their ability to marry. That's how you pay dowry. It's how you're able to buy property, so on and so forth. It's literally your representation of your social status, your bank account. And so when there is a large cohort of young men seeking to marry, they're working to increase their size of their cattle herds. And now that they all have automatic weapons, that's far more dangerous than it used to be when people did those fights with sticks. So there had been an ongoing fight between two groups in a city in the rural area around a city called Rumbek in South Sudan, and it had really shut down a part of the city. So because there had been so much fighting, kids were no longer going to school, so on and so forth. So the WPT that we had been working with and supporting there had decided that the senior leadership had gone in, the governor had gone in and told them to stop fighting. They would stop for a little bit and then they would start again. So the WPT said, we need to try. So we loaded up in a vehicle, and if anybody's had any chance to spend time in a place where the roads are not paved, it's an adventure getting out there. So we're loaded up in the back of these Land Cruisers. We're all 13, 14, 15 of us in each of the Land Cruisers. We get in the Land Cruiser. I'm in one of them. The women start singing. So this is the starting place, right? Thinking about your previous interview. And they were singing in their local language, in Dinka. But I could hear my name. I could hear nonviolence being said into their songs. And I asked them what they were doing, and they said singing gave them courage. And so they were making up songs about preparing themselves. So this is like their version of preparing to go to war. They were preparing to go to peace, and really building each other up. So we arrive, we all spill out into what looks for all the world to me like an abandoned village. I'm wondering, what the heck are we doing out here? And they say, okay, let's go. We're going to sit down. So we sit down under a large mango tree, which is what you do when it's very hot and you're seeking shade. And there's a few people around. There's some older folks going around, some kids, and, dogs and chickens and the whole bit. And we sit there for 10 minutes, 20 minutes, half an hour. I'm starting to wonder what it is. I keep asking, are you sure we're in the right place? Very North American approach. Efficiency is key. We've got a schedule to keep. And they keep assuring me, just be quiet, just be calm. And maybe 10, 15 more minutes go by. And then we start to see some movement in the bush behind us. And out of that bush, very slowly, we start to see some young men come forward. And these young men are skinny. Their clothes are torn and dirty. They're coming forward. They have AK-47s on their shoulders. They're all armed. And what the women had known all along was that they were there and they were watching to see if they could come out, if it was a trustworthy group, or should they stay hidden. When they'd heard us coming, they'd hidden themselves. So they finally come out and they come forward, and their leader comes forward and speaks to the woman from the WPT, who was clearly the elder of the group, and just said, "My sister, what are you doing here?" And the women said, "We want to talk to you. We want to talk to you about what's going on." So they said, "Fine." So they sat down and they were just quiet for a little while. And then the women started speaking as they felt. It was not rehearsed. There was no speech. There was nothing written on a piece of paper, but really speaking from their hearts. And they self-identified as mothers and wives and sisters, family members, community members, and saying how much it was hurting them to see these boys killing each other, and saying they don't even understand why they would continue to have babies if this is what they're going to grow up to do. How they called upon their experiences of being intermarried amongst their clans and so on and so forth. And this group of young men who were very hardened and very tough and very nervous started to soften. And you could really see that they were okay to be hearing these stories. And then at one point, this young man, the leader, who had not one, not two, but 3 AK-47s on his shoulders, he just let his guns drop, and he said, and he had a tear running down his cheek. And he said, "I don't know what we're doing here. I just want to go home." And it was the thing that broke the ice, the thing that broke the moment. And through that, they then spent the next couple of hours sharing their stories, talking to each other, letting those boys know that they could come home. It was okay. They could come home and they could stop fighting. And that agreement that they negotiated that day held. in a way that the army had not been able to hold, the police had not been able to hold, and the governors had not been able to hold. So this is really inclusivity, grassroots, nonviolent action in action, with those most impacted by the violence speaking on their own behalf, elevating their own voices. Speaking of which, good segue, centering those most impacted is really critical in the work that we do. So it's very easy when you become an organization to be very policy and procedure. Again, efficiency, empire loves efficiency, as we always remind ourselves, and to get really focused on that and saying, well, we know best. We've done this in many different countries. Don't worry, we have a solution for you. And every context, location, or country that we go into, we have to always remind ourselves when we first enter, and as we've been there for a while, that we must continually radically center those who are most impacted by violence, not just those who are local, but those are most who have the least amount of power in our thinking, informing our decisioning, helping to know what is the best way, telling us what they need. This is a photo from the Ukraine. We went into Ukraine just 2 years ago, a couple months after the invasion, and it was a context we were really unsure of. It's not the type of violence we normally work in. An international invasion, prima facie, the large level of threats, the primary threat was coming from the sky, and we could not change the calculus of that. We do not have that kind of influence over the invading authority, the invading government, and so on and so forth. And it was a very united front against the invasion. So we weren't dealing with the usual intra communal conflict that we normally deal. But we wanted to go, we did an assessment, and we really just kept our minds very open, saying, if we can be useful, if we can be helpful, let's do that now. And we can be helpful now. And by being helpful now, by building trust and really understanding what's happening here, we can be useful in the next phases when the inevitable impact of trauma hits, and when the community is having to come back together, and the social cohesion is being torn apart within what had previously felt like a unified community. So we really went to work in figuring out what we could do to support the local frontline responders. So the Ukrainian organizations, individuals, little community organizations, little businesses retooled themselves and literally became frontline responders overnight. They were doing 24 hours, 7 days a week, literally service delivery. They were driving their personal cars out to the front lines. They were, coming back with bullet holes in the side of their cars to deliver food, to try and do whatever they could to people who were trapped or living in villages very close to the line. And what we could really see is, in any other context we've ever been in, that was led by the UN. That response would have been led by the UN. It would have been led by international organizations, but this was being led by local folks. So while they had the drive and they were doing amazing work, they didn't have any of the infrastructure that we benefit from to take care of ourselves. They didn't have the training around how to do safety plans as an organization, how to do risk reduction in the delivery of service, how to make sure that you are recognizing this is a marathon, not a sprint, and you need mental health care, and you need to give all of your volunteers that care so that they can do it for the long term, so on and so forth. Medical health insurance, access to counseling, training, personal protective equipment. They were literally at the front lines. They had nothing. So that is how we framed our response. And we have become sort of the resource center for the frontline responders and really framed it that way. So it looks really different than it does in other places, but it is because it was really informed by those most impacted by violence telling us what it was that they needed. And then we go in a real relational way and say, okay, how can we support this? How can we help start building out zones of safety around them? And that's the work we do there. And this is the last one. And this takes us back to Sudan. And so one thing that we can do can be really helpful is what we call opening up access. So in areas that had suffered really significant conflict, violent conflict, for folks who live there are running away, and folks who would otherwise come in to provide humanitarian aid or other support, development aid, also get moved out. And we kind of can get into a sense where we say it's too dangerous, or no one will let us come in, so we just can't. It becomes a self-defined, hard to reach or inaccessible location. We really frame ourselves as quite forward-leaning, and we really don't take no for an answer very easily, and really work on trying to open up access for places. So this was before the war started in Sudan, and this was in Darfur in a place called Karanik. And you can see in that one photo, it had about 6 months prior to this there had been a fight and it had been burned. So all these buildings burnt to the ground, many people displaced, many people killed and injured. And then the international actors, the humanitarian actors who had been in there helping in that region had left. And so they had just shut it down, said it's inhospitable. Even the local government authorities said it's too dangerous to go. So when our team was organizing, they were sort of looking at the map and saying, okay, there's lots of response here. We don't need to go there. There's already great things happening. But where are people being left out? And what we kept hearing about was Karanik. So they really started to build up on what we call this kilometer by kilometer trust building approach. And so the route to Karanik was considered dangerous because there was representatives from the groups. So again, referring back to the terminology that they self-identify as Arab and African, there was representatives of both of those groups literally along the way. And they had been in conflict with each other, and that's what had resulted in the burning of Karanik at the time. So the team members that you can see in the photos set about a plan to reach out and travel a little bit down that road every day, meet with people, chat with people, talk about who we were, introduce ourselves, and start asking them what was going on for them, and eventually asking for their agreement that it would be okay to let us safely pass. We're not asking for them to ensure our safety. They can't, and that's what they always say, we can't ensure your safety. We don't know who else is out here. We're just saying, we're just asking that you will not aggress on us and that you would welcome our presence there. So they did this work. It took them quite a while, sort of going every day for maybe a month or so. And then they finally had agreement from all parties that, yes, it would be welcome if the NP team could come into the town of Karanik. And they really wanted to show that they could not just go, because this is often what happens. You go for 5 minutes or you stay for an hour and then you do polite things, take some nice photos and you leave. We really wanted to show them that we wanted to show solidarity. So the team really wanted to spend the night. Nobody has spent the night since this had happened. So this is what you can see in that one photo where they're lying out on the cots. This was the only place available to sleep in Karanik for them at the time. So they went there and they were able to do that. And the level of trust that they were able to build by doing that action was immense. So from that point on, we were able to open up space. We were able to go back and forth a few times, report to the local authorities. We eventually set up a sub office there and invited other actors to come in who provided food and healthcare, contributed towards education, so on and so forth. So by using a relational nonviolent approach to open up that space, then we were able to help secure other services that the community really desperately needed. Let me leave it there for now. It's a lot of talking at folks, and as you said, there are questions in the wings.
Yes, thank you for sharing all of that. I do think Dr. Kim has a bunch of questions that she wanted to ask. Do you want to go ahead?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much, Tiffany. That was very insightful and informative. And the examples, not just stories, the examples that you shared, I think are very impactful. So given everything that we just learned from you, can people around the world apply nonviolent tactics and strategies and conflicts in their own lives? How do you feel about that? And what are your thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's often the hardest to do. It's much easier to help other people than to help ourselves. It's much easier to recognize the faults in other people's approaches than to recognize the faults of our own. Often when we're speaking to people that, people say you do great work and all that stuff. It's something I can't do. I have a family. I have to be, for whatever reason. And our response to always is if any of us who do this work we're not willing to do it in our own communities, we shouldn't be doing it ourselves. This is the place that we start. So absolutely. And now more than ever, and as if we spend any time watching the news or paying attention to what's happening on social media and so on and so forth, so the reductive narrative that is driving us apart is really dangerous. And it's tearing at the fabric of our social cohesion, it's tearing at the fabric of our collective society, and we're becoming atomized. And I would say no greater moment to push forward with a nonviolent narrative, to
Yeah.
to look at the principles of nonviolence and think of what does that mean in everything I do, every post
Right.
I engage with, every assumption that I make, every person that I am mad at because I think they cut me off on the street, so on and so forth. It sounds simplistic, but these are the building blocks to violence, and they could be the building blocks to peace.
I think that's really beautifully put. And you actually said something a little bit earlier in your slides that I even sat down and took a note real quickly because it's something that very much resonates. And it's the understanding of exclusivity and inclusivity. So I just want to go there for one moment. Can you repeat what you said in this moment in time of how, I don't even want to put the words. You go ahead, Tiffany. So
Yeah,
exclusivity.
I mean, really looking at exclusivity is dangerous. So when people are excluded from a group, we see this as people, the motivation for people who pick up guns, they feel like they were not included. We talk to people who join militias. We talk to people who join even what could be branded by some folks as extremist elements. And one of the main reasons when you ask why, what motivated you to do this, is it's the only thing I could think of to be included. It's the only thing I could think of to do to feel like I was safe. Inclusivity, when we bring each other, when we make the table bigger, is the thing that will keep us ourselves safe by keeping each other safe.
That's beautiful. I love that connection, that feeling of community, all going towards how we started, that we're all human. And if we can kind of plug into that. Yes. Okay. So next question, are different approaches needed? And you did touch on this, of course, but again, kind of just let's call this out for a second. Are different approaches needed for conflicts with different causes? So for example, people who are with conflicts rooted in fear and retaliation versus those driven by ideology. Big differences, of course, results we see can be very similar. So in your experience, what are the different approaches in general?
Yeah, I think yes, and I think in the specific tactics can vary depending on what is needed. I think the commonality of approach is to remember that as uncomfortable as it can be, particularly if you are not from that community, is that community needs to inform what needs to happen. And so for some places, they want to pursue accountability, formal statutory justice processes. And that is the thing that has been identified that is the barrier to a ceasefire. It's the barrier to a peace agreement. So, and in some other locations, there's traditional practices that don't have the same outcome as a punitive justice system, for example. And we have to be comfortable saying, if that's what the people in this community say will bring us back into a peaceful coexistence, then fine. We have to find a way to support that if we are not of that community. So I think that is the commonality driven by those most impacted by violence, and building in all the flexibility you need to say this context is going to change. There's going to be days, weeks, months where there's really apex violence. There's a lot going on, and then that's going to bottom out for a while, and then we can catch our breath and we can work on root causes and sustainable change. And then we have, this sort of toolkit that we can apply, and sometimes it's oriented more towards the direct protection, sometimes it's more the long-term sustainable change. So building in that flexibility, keeping it rooted in values.
Yeah. So I also wanted to let Nick know that you can answer any of these questions as well. So Tiffany, what you were saying just now was that we should listen to what the people on the ground need, listen to what the people that are most impacted by the violence need. We were just before this having a conversation with Parents Circle, which is Israeli and Palestinian parents who have been lost kids in the war, or lost family members in the war. And one of the commentators was, we have comments coming in all the time from Facebook and YouTube, was saying, we need to focus on, the Israeli aggression and the genocide and things like that. But the parents in the Parents Circle, both of them were saying, we also need, to talk for peace and not for taking one side, and to not be one-sided, and to be able to see the big picture. And that's what's going to get us to peace. And I've heard peace activists like them say things like that. I interviewed also, which is going to be played later in the summit, Ali Abu Awad, who is one of the most prominent and nonviolence activists in the West Bank, in the Palestinian territories, and nonviolence activists in Israel. And they all say the same thing, like, don't blame, don't make it one-sided, realize that this is like, complex, and that we need to find peace together without blame, and with compassion and empathy and respect for one another. But at the same time, I also see so many Palestinian people that do believe in violence, for example, and also Israeli people that believe in violence, both sides. And so, and actually, it's even, I don't know, I don't know the percentages, but it's very large percentages, I think, that believe in these things. So when we listen to the groups that are most affected by the violence, are we listening to those nonviolence activists, like the mothers who lost the kids, and the nonviolence activists, or are we listening to just the population at large, or general people that are like, yeah, we need to kill people to save ourselves? Like, what are we supposed to do in those situations?
Well, I mean, I think for us, I mean, when we talk about centering those most impacted by violence, it doesn't mean we don't talk to anybody else. Again, going back to this nonpartisan perspective, is for the work that we do, we need to talk to everybody, and so that can mean talking to some unsavory characters. That is, you would find yourself perhaps a little uncomfortable with. I think, I mean, and this is just my opinion from the work that we do and my own experiences, is that the real focus is talking to listen, is to find out what is the motivation. Why do people believe in violence, or are people driven to violence out of desperation? Most often, that is the case, right? There's sort of folks who like take the path of violence because there's a hunger for there's greed and power considerations and so on and so forth. And then everybody else, mostly it's out of desperation for there's no other alternative. They don't feel like there's another alternative. And who are we to say? And, and this is a good example of going into Ukraine. We thought, gosh, we need to be careful about going in as an organization called Nonviolent Peaceforce when they've just been invaded, and with a message of nonviolence, and people saying, what do you expect us to do? Just let them run over us? And say, that is absolutely, we understand that's not at all the angle that we're taking on. We're really thinking about what is the way that you can be as safe as possible in this situation and anticipate what's coming next. So, I mean, again, we have to be able to sit with the complexity. We want easy answers, and there aren't any. And we have to sit with the complexity of the situation. We have to sit with the discomfort that things don't end immediately. We think if we yell louder, we get more people in the streets, it's going to end, whether it's Palestine or Sudan or any of the other conflicts that are going on. And that's just not how it works. And it's really painful. And one of the tenets of nonviolence is really learning to sit and sit in that discomfort of other people's pain, and figuring out what that space is without always acting, and being open to hear what is happening here, and understand why people make the choices that they make. Wow.
Yeah, that's a very powerful answer. And I just wanted to note, after this, I think we have somebody from South Sudan who's speaking about his experience, but then as a refugee. But we also have Satish Kumar, who it's a recorded interview that I recorded a few days ago. He's a very powerful nonviolence activist, and I've asked him about Ukraine. He's a Gandhian type, he believes in it in like an ideological kind of way, like nonviolence. And I asked him, well, what are people in Ukraine supposed to do? Are they not supposed to fight back? And he said, no, we shouldn't fight. Instead, we should have people coming from all over the world to Ukraine and stand nonviolently and say, no, we're not going to allow this. And actually, when he kind of put it in this way of like a peace force, he kind of, I don't know if he used those exact words, but I think that was part of what put in my mind to go and look for you guys for like a peace force of some kind. I was like, oh, these are the guys that Satish was talking about. But I guess it's not exactly your direction. But what do you think of Satish's idea? Do you think that that's something that can work? I'll put that to both of you before we go back to Dr. Kim's questions.
Yeah, Peace Force is the Shanti Sena. So that's that Gandhian idea of if you can organize for violence, you can organize for peace. And that is indeed the root of our name, or where our name, the inspiration came from. This is something that is presented a lot. I think in principle, it's a great idea and it could be very powerful. The reality of putting it together is really, really difficult. The level, the numbers of people that you would need, and the level of organization you would need, and with not just that in that moment, but you need a whole chain of organization. You need sort of the really obvious in the press, get people's attention, build up the solidarity, you also need the very high level political behind closed doors space saving negotiations going on, and then the humanitarian work dealing with the people who are continuing to be harmed. So do I think it's a great idea? Absolutely. Do I think it's possible? Yes, it could be. It is also not easy. It's something that in every single conflict we've worked in, it's come up as a suggestion.
Wow. Yeah, I've sort of debated with Satish about these things, about the probability of like his ideas working or whatever. But he did make a point that there's so much effort and so much money and so much organization poured into the military solutions, the violence and everything. What billions and billions of dollars, maybe more,
Billions,
hundreds of
yeah.
billions, trillions. It's if that money were to be used, or those resources or that time and that attention and that effort was used to do something like this, it seems like it might even be easier, right? You don't have to put together all these guns, like you don't have to put together all that stuff. But I think so. I do think it's possible that we can do it. But the question is whether it would stop someone like Putin or someone like Hitler or someone, for example, that's ideologically driven, as Dr. Kim was mentioning. What do you think? Do you think that there are conflicts that just can't be solved through these types of means because the people that are the aggressors are just, they won't care and they're just gonna just kill everyone?
Yes, I do think there are some situations where that is true, and that's that discomfort, and that it's a real pragmatic approach that is really difficult to sit with and to admit to ourselves. I think if we think about unpack what the Shanti Sena is, I think there's a difference between having a one-off, everybody get on a plane and let's go to this one location and hope we have a significant change, versus trying to do what we would call UCP or UCP inspired organized approaches that start linking up. So some of the work that we do is in support of a community of practice of unarmed civilian protection UCP actors who either do very similar work to us or UCP inspired work all around the world. And that's really our thinking as well, is how do we support and lift up a community of practice that really starts to look at building a standing capacity for peace and protection. We have a standing capacity for war in most countries. And if we could build up we have the Red Cross, disaster risk reduction. People get training what to do if there's a flood or a hurricane or a typhoon. What if across communities, using the various networks that are already established there, people are learning how to do this type of work. And so whether they're called upon in their own community or called to help in another community, that we could do that in an organized fashion. So that's the thing that we'll say. Organizers throughout history will tell you that's how we affect real change.
Yeah. So do you, that type of change can, I think, help a lot, but like, is it against something like a Hitler, for example? Do you think that these types of things could still work?
I think they can work because I think when we know about it, we've missed thousands, if not millions, of entry points to change what's the trajectory of where it is going. So by the time we are at an ISIS situation or the full throttle situation with the Nazis and concentration camps, all of that buildup, the opportunities to change the trajectory have been missed. So there's that. And we know in all of those situations, people were doing resistance work. It was low key. It's not high. It didn't end the problem, but it saved a lot of lives. And this is another thing we talk about, is it's really easy to get paralyzed or by the complexity of a situation and kind of overwhelmed. It's so big. There's nothing we can do. There's always something we can do. And there's always something we can do. You don't have to be the person who's got the biggest headline, who figures out the singular thing that's going to bring world peace. There's entry points all along the way. We see a deterioration of freedom of speech. We have a deterioration of democracy in some places happening right now. This is the moment to get in there and affect those changes.
Wow.
I think just on that, the one thing to also remember is they're individuals, but they're backed by a full system. And a system is also made up of people, and people individually think very differently. So again, just calling on Sudan, we've seen community leaders who have come together and stood up and said to the main conflict warring parties, we don't want this. We don't need this for our communities. We've seen war all our lives. We don't want it anymore. And within that system, there are individuals who are prepared to say, no, we've had enough. We're not doing it. And so, as Tiffany said, there's entry points there's early warning entry points that these things are ramping up. But even when they're there is always going to be individuals or glimmers of hope where you can disrupt that system that is churning out all of these awful outcomes for people.
Wow. Yeah. Thank you both for those answers. And it reminds me of also what Satish was saying, that nonviolence is not a one-off event. He used that word. It's something that goes all along the way. But once we reach, and Dr. Kim, sorry, we'll get to those questions in a second. I just wanted
take
to
your
finish
time.
this
I'm
conversation
interested.
because this is very important. So, but once we get to that critical point, let's say the Nazis in full force, ISIS, these types of ideological actors that are just driven to just finish their destruction. And do we need military force at that point? Is that something that you think so?
Yeah,
I'll put that to both of you.
Yeah, I from a pragmatic perspective, I think that there's a full spectrum of things that need. I think the problem is we have developed an assumption and an over reliance that in order to protect ourselves, to protect civilians, to reduce violence, you need weapons. You need to use force or to have the threat of force present to be able to affect change. And we can see this in countries across the world. That is just not true. It amplifies and escalates, and it creates things more dangerously. There are some circumstances, I would argue, where that is the option, where you've got full out battle that it's going on, as it relates to how violent conflict impacts civilians. It gets into the DNA of society, and particularly in protracted conflict and multi-generational conflict, and therefore having an armed force is not addressing 95-98% of the needs that are associated with violence that could easily change the course and for good, or if left unaddressed, untreated trauma, so on and so forth, revenge cycles just feed into that next force. And so yes, at least personally, I'm not coming at from a purely pacifist perspective. I would like to get there at some point in my life. I am not there yet. I just think that it's the over reliance and the over assumption and the over resourcing of those methods is what has sort of tilted us into a really unfortunate position where we are in now.
Wow. Thank you, Tiffany. That's such a powerful and pragmatic answer, and it's something that I've been searching for in my work on the peace issue, just trying to understand all the spiritual people talking about nonviolence, and I'm just like, but what about this situation? Is it possible? And I think that your description of using nonviolence as much as possible, and along the way trying to prevent getting to a point where we need the violence, but also acknowledging that different means may be needed in different situations, that not everything is uniformly ideologically has to be a certain way, I think is a very important pragmatic understanding that I think is really needed in our community, and in general, the subtleties and the nuances of that is very important. Nick, did you want to say anything to that before? And then I promise I'm going to shut up, and Dr. Kim, you go ahead with the rest of the questions.
Enjoying our time.
Okay, thank you.
Nick, anything else that you want to? Okay, and I'll move on. And before I even move on to the next question, I have to take a moment here to acknowledge one of the comments that came in, because it's moments like this where we are, as we have every single one of us, I keep going here because it is, I think we all agree how important that we are all human. We are all in so many different places, and this connection of even just having this conversation and connecting like this is so important. And someone, I hope I'm pronouncing the name correctly, but Thiik Machol just wrote in a comment and said, I'm watching you live and currently in a refugee camp without proper network connection and electricity. Yet here we are all together, having this time together in this incredibly important conversation. So just wanted to acknowledge that. I'm so happy that you could join us.
And I just wanted to let people know that Thiik is actually the South Sudanese refugee currently living in Sudan that is currently living in Uganda, working as a peace ambassador to try to help the refugees there. He's the one that I interviewed a few days ago and is going to be featured next after this session.
I really look forward to that conversation, and it was very awesome to call that out at this moment. So then, Tiffany, A question specifically for you is, as executive director, you have a big picture view of world conflicts. So which conflicts do you feel should be getting a little bit or a lot more attention in the US right now? Curious.
The
For many
US.
various reasons, I know. Yes.
The US.
So
I think
many?
that, yeah, no,
Mhm.
exactly. I think the US should be getting more attention. The
Yeah,
conflict
okay, that's
domestically within the US. I could
love
list a
that.
number of geographic
Mhm.
locations, things to watch,
Mhm.
conflicts to watch. We've got the Central Sahel. We have DRC and Rwanda heating up. We have the militarization, militarization of Southeast Asia. I mean, there are
Right?
hotspots around the world. We could talk about each of those an hour-long conversation
Yes.
at least. It's all part of a trend. We have a little bit of a perfect storm developing, right? Where we've got, so these big scary headlines, climate change. We've got the AI generation, which, a lot of that is for good. Some of that is very scary, and has a lot of potentially forever changing impact. And we don't have the intellectual capacity amongst most of us to really understand what that is. The impact of climate change. And then we have a real wildly shifting geopolitical landscape. So, some of it is, there's a whole, again, it's a longer conversation, the factors that have gone into putting us where we are now, but we see an absolute shifting in sort of what used to be the rules-based order. That's the language that's used to refer to sort of the multilateral globalization approach to how we are coexisting on the planet together as a quote unquote family of nations, which was, led by the Bretton Woods Agreement. And all of that has really changed. People's roles have changed, or countries' roles have changed, and so on and so forth. And we're seeing a real significant changes. On the soil of the United States right now, there are more weapons than there are more people in civilian hands, automatic weapons. It is a country I have been in various locations. I was in Iraq when a new news came in of a school shooting, and I was sitting with a number of Iraqis who looked at me and said, "What is wrong with that country?"
Mhm.
And now if you talk to an American about what you were in Iraq, and they would say, "Oh God, were you safe?" And I felt perfectly safe there. And they were very worried about the people in that particular community
Yes.
in the US. So I think it's very easy to project out, and the effort really needs to be looking at home. This is you all know this. It was a big year for the US. I am Canadian, despite what I sound like.
I know. I already heard.
Yeah, but I would just say yes.
Yes.
Start domestically.
Yes. I love that, Tiffany. I know because I have family in Canada. So
Yeah.
right away I was like, okay,
You
we're gonna
ready?
no, I really appreciate that in all seriousness. My next question is also going to be formed in a certain way, but I know that we are on the same page, but I really appreciate and had a feeling that that would be your response. Our whole world has to be very aware of this right now. So the final question that I have for all of us, again, please take note, there's a reason why I'm starting the question in this way, but do we feel, Nick and Tiffany, should global citizens choose sides in these conflicts, supporting one and denouncing the other? Or should we focus on unity, humanity, mutual understanding, and peace? As I said, I already know the answer, but let this be a beautiful closure to our conversation.
Nick, do you want to go first? I've been talking a lot.
No, it's fine. I mean, Tiffany, I can never, ever say anything better than you do. So there's not even much point me trying. You say everything so beautifully. But I think, Tiffany's phrase of exclusivity is dangerous just sums it up, right? It's obviously very hard. With a lot of the conflicts we have today, they're very emotional for everybody. And you see this, you see everybody getting involved, everybody becoming very emotive about a number of conflicts. I say that on the global scale, it's a small number of conflicts. And actually, if they got emotional about others, it would be great. But I think, it's not going to get us to a point of nonviolence. It's not going to get us to a point at which people feel they have a solid ground on which to move forward collectively. And so it's really hard. And there is a place for justice. There is a place for reconciliation. But unfortunately, if you are going to pick sides, you're going to exclude certain voices. You're not going to understand a certain viewpoint. And that is just going to lead to more challenges down the line. But Tiffany will say this in a much more eloquent way. So I will leave it with her to finish up.
You give me far too much credit. The answer, yes, the answer is obvious. I think that as we live a life increasingly behind screens, informed by the dopamine hit of outrage culture, we have a generation of young people who have not had the experience to build their interpersonal life in person, that the idea of calling people out and being really identified by categories, identity markers, it's just creating an environment where it's very easy to be exclusive. Very easy to say, these are the people in my life. You have to meet these categories. And if you don't, you're not in my life. I will not engage with you. And we're losing the nuance and that sort of fiber in between us. And what's wonderful that brings us together amongst our hobbies, and we can find people in different parts of the world who have the same interests in us, has also driven us apart. And it's really dangerous. It's deeply worrying. It's changing our brain chemistry. It's changing us at the cellular level, and certainly the way that we interact as a group of humanity. And we will pay the price. We are facing as humanity the most complex set of existential threats to our human security than we have ever faced. This sort of nexus is happening while at the same time driving ourselves apart and reducing our mental capacity for complex problem solving. So absolutely, we need to come together.
Beautifully said, Tiffany.
Wow. I would like to ask also on that same subject, a question that's been sort of talked about in some of the other sessions. Like I mentioned in the previous session, we had the Israeli and Palestinian parents, and we had the commentator who was a political scientist who was saying, all this, peace talk is nice, but we need to call out the aggressor and, the Israel genocide, using those kinds of words. And we've just talked about, being able to move toward peace and nonviolence through mutual understanding all sides. What do you say to someone like that because there's so many right now, especially if you look at the college campuses, the demonstrations are so one-sided. I wish we could see demonstrations where Jews and Muslims, for example, would sit down together and meditate in peace. Actually, I'm going to organize that after the peace issue is finished in Union Square in New York. I'm planning on that. But in the meantime, right now, the demonstrations seem very one-sided, and everybody seems to be so convinced that if you're not one-sided, if you're not pro-Israel or pro-Palestine, or if you're not super angry about it, and you're like super like this is the right side and that is the wrong side, there's no moral equivalence, all that kind of stuff, that you're being wishy-washy, waffly, you're not helping, you're hurting because you're not being clear about who's in the right and who's in the wrong. What do you say to someone like that? Because I have a hard time figuring out what to say to them.
Yeah, so those are tough conversations. I mean, I think a lot of that is coming from pain and fear. Those very extreme reactions, it's really being driven by pain. It's an amplification and a threat of concerns and fear of what's happening for people in their own lives, and what they think, the sort of really strong desire to be able to affect change. So if I'm really frustrated in all other elements, and this is so obviously wrong, and it's drawing up this. I don't think there's a singular answer to what do you say. I think it really depends. There's not a single sentence that will be easier. The work that we need to do for when we're entering into those conversations is with ourselves, is sort of centering ourselves, having the grace to hear those opinions that we don't agree with, that also trigger us to have a real, an opposite reaction, trying to bring together what you're suggesting to do, bring people together, to role model and demonstrate alternatives that are concrete. I mean, none of this is so simple. I mean, there's not a singular country involved in any violent active armed conflict in the world today. They're collectively supported by other states, other interests, other corporate things. It's very, very complicated. So we need to hold that space for nuanced conversation. And if somebody needs to yell, fine, you yell. And when the yelling finishes, I will still be here, and then we can talk.
Yeah. That's beautiful. Thank you. And Nick, just if you have something that you wanted to say to the same question, it's just as a personal opinion, even like what do you say if somebody doesn't want to look at both sides of a conflict and they just want to take one side?
I mean, it's difficult, and you can understand why people do. You get it. You can understand, and as Tiffany said, there's got to be space for people to be able to articulate their fears, their frustrations, and to be honest, a lot of is frustration because the solution is so far beyond most people. It is incredible. I mean, this one is one of the world's most incredibly complex, and so no human individual on earth is going to come up with a solution. And I think that's very frustrating for many people when they see what's going on. It is very difficult, and to be honest, atrocity prevention, stopping this from happening in future, there is a place for ensuring that perpetrators are held to account. That is a key mechanism for atrocity prevention. And so there is a place for it. But when you're getting into those incredibly divisive narratives, when you're being very reductive of all of these additional elements that are involved in the system, Tiffany touched on it, there is so many dynamics going on that when you make it very reductive and you make it very black and white, you're actually taking away a lot of stuff that should be talked about. It should be nuanced. It should be sophisticated discussion, not just aggression that is targeted. And actually all you do is then further divide communities. If I'm being shouted at, I'm going to get really het up, and then I'm going to go shout at somebody else. The question would be, is the way you're expressing your emotion actually helpful for us to come together as a collective to address what is one of the world's most complex problems? If yes, carry on. If no, maybe we can find a different way to deal with it in a more personal manner, while being more targeted with advocacy, while being, targeting weapons trades, all those sorts of things, rather than just making it very, very two groups against each other.
Thank you. Thank you both for your beautiful and eloquent responses to all of these questions, and for the deep insights that you bring from your years of experience literally on the ground in the field. Mm-hmm. That I think it brings so much depth and experience to this peace summit, where many of the speakers are very passionate ideologically, but don't have that kind of grounding. And I appreciate what you've brought here today. And I'll let Dr. Kim say a few words before we end this stream and start the next session with Thiik Machol and Satish Kumar.
I think you said that beautifully, Kevin. I thank you both so incredibly much for being here and for doing everything that you do. It is one thing to put thought into things, to situations that need that positive thought, that complex thought even. It's another to put out good wishes and positivity, and it is another to have action in the things that we do. And one of you mentioned, so I did want to call out that, and I appreciate this as well, that even the smallest things, we can't ever think that does not make a difference. In fact, my teacher taught me, it just came to mind and is, I believe, very fitting, that one match can light 1,000. That is one of the keys of living meditation, which has been passed down for centuries. One match can light 1,000. And if you think of what that means, I have to say both, because that is of the Tao, both yin and yang, good and bad, that dichotomy always exists, that while one match of positivity can light 1,000, also one match of negativity can light 1,000 negative. And so if we acknowledge that and understand that together and continue in this journey and this path, then I'm certain we can get a lot done. So thank you both very much. And thank you everyone for being here. Please stay tuned after our break for, as Kevin said, Thiik Machol. Beautiful names that I hope I'm pronouncing correctly. I am really looking forward to that.
And Satish Kumar. So the next after this break, so what I would recommend to everyone who's watching, once this ends, after about 3 or 4 minutes, just refresh the Facebook or YouTube page, and you'll see the next stream started. It's going to have Thiik Machol, refugee from South Sudan, who's currently working in Uganda for the safety of the refugees there. Yes. Satish Kumar, who's a very powerful nonviolence advocate, very Gandhian. And then we have a meditation for helping us visualize and manifest peace on earth within ourselves, in our own minds, and to be able to put it out into the world. So I'll see you all in the next session. And thank you again, Tiffany and Nick, for being here. You. I hope you all have a beautiful day.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you so much. Bye.